The fluorescent light above the interrogation table hummed at exactly 60 hertz. I'd counted the oscillations for the past 2 hours, while Detective Strand watched me through the one-way glass, probably wondering why I kept pressing my palms flat against the metal table, feeling for vibrations that shouldn't exist. "Mr. Parrish," his voice crackled through the speaker. "You want to explain why we found you in the Rio Grande at 4 a.m, trying to drown a waterproof case full of photographs?" I didn't answer. My hands were still tingling from the water, from the cold, from touching those images one last time before I'd tried to make them disappear. The cuts on my forearms had stopped bleeding, but the symbols I'd carved there 3 nights ago still burned. Not physically. That pain had faded. This was different, like they were pulling at something deeper, rearranging the architecture beneath my skin. "Holden." Strand's voice softened. He'd gone to high school with my older brother. "Talk to me. Your landlord said you haven't slept in 5 days. Your boss at the Space Heritage Archive says you stopped showing up after you processed some donation from the old NASA warehouse demolition. What the hell is going on?" The demolition, right. That's where this started. 3 weeks ago, a construction crew in Houston had been tearing down Building 23 at the old Johnson Space Center complex, one of those Cold War-era structures scheduled for replacement since before I was born. They'd found boxes in a sub-basement that wasn't on any blueprint. Most of it was junk, rusted equipment, obsolete computer tapes, the usual bureaucratic debris of a dead era. But one box had been different, marked with red tape and a label that made the foreman laugh. "Incinerate, do not process. Authorization level, dark arrow." Dark arrow. Nobody had used that designation since the 70s. The foreman figured it was probably just old porn or stolen office supplies, so he sold the entire box to a memorabilia dealer for $200 and a case of beer. The dealer, Bobby Thorne, ran a shop in Clear Lake, sorted through most of it, kept what he could sell on eBay, and donated the rest to our archive for the tax write-off. That's how the film canister ended up on my desk. I'd been working the night shift, alone cataloguing donations in the basement of the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center archive. The canister was vintage Kodak, the kind they stopped making before the moon landings ended. Someone had wrapped it in a plastic bag, sealed it, labeled it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Apollo 18, final roll. I should have logged it and locked it away, and I should have followed protocol. Instead, I'd taken it to my buddy Webb's photo lab on NASA Road 1. "Holden." Strand's voice pulled me back. "Where are the photographs now?" I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. My eyes had changed. The left one showed a different image than the right, a fractional delay, like my brain was processing 2 separate timelines. "They're already on the moon," I said. "They've always been on the moon." 3 weeks earlier, Webb's photo lab sat wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a bail bonds office on NASA Road 1, the kind of place that survived on graduation photos and driver's license renewals. I'd known Webb since community college. He'd dropped out to run his dad's business, while I'd somehow ended up with a history degree and a night shift job handling dead people's space memorabilia. "You're seriously asking me to develop 45-year-old film at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday?" Webb wiped developer solution off his hands, leaving purple stains on the shop towel. "You know the chemicals could have degraded, right? Might be nothing but fog." "That's why I'm asking you." I set the canister on his counter, careful not to touch it more than necessary. My fingertips had been itching since I'd opened the donation box. "You're the only person I know who still does analog." He picked up the canister, turned it over in the light. His expression shifted. "Where'd you get this?" "Archive donation." "Why?" "This seal." He pointed to a small stamp on the metal, a triangle inside a circle, barely visible. "That's military-grade archival sealing. They used it for classified reconnaissance photos during Vietnam. Whoever packed this wanted it to last forever." He paused. "Or wanted whatever's inside to stay hidden forever." The fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside, traffic rushed past toward the space center. "Can you do it or not?" Webb studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral. Come back Thursday afternoon." I I should have waited, should have gone home, gotten some sleep, filed the paperwork properly. Instead, I'd spent the next 2 days researching Apollo 18 in the archive's restricted database. According to official records, the mission was cancelled in September 1970 due to budget cuts. The hardware was repurposed, the crew reassigned. End of story. But I'd found discrepancies. Requisition orders for life support systems dated 3 months after the cancellation, a manifest for lunar samples that didn't correspond to any official mission, and a single line in a comptroller's report from 1973. Dark arrow secondary expenses, $47 million. Thursday came. I drove to Webb's shop during my lunch break, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The closed sign was up. The door was unlocked. Webb. The shop was empty. The lights in the darkroom glowed red through the half-open door. I found him sitting on the floor next to the enlarger, surrounded by photographs. His hands were covered in dried blood. He'd used a razor blade to carve something into his left palm, a series of lines and angles that hurt to focus on. They were already there, he said without looking up. His voice was flat, distant, in the crater, waiting. Jesus, Webb, what? Look at them. He gestured to the photographs spread across the floor. Really look. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to call 911, to pretend I'd never found that damned canister. But I crouched down, picked up the first photograph. It showed the moon's surface, grey and cratered. 3 figures in spacesuits stood at the edge of a dark depression, their shadows stretching long across the dust. The photo quality was remarkable, sharp, detailed, professional. One astronaut was pointing towards something in the crater. The second photo was taken closer. The crater wall had structures built into it, geometric shapes that reflected the harsh sunlight, surfaces too smooth to be natural. They looked ancient and brand new at the same time, covered in a thin layer of lunar dust but pristine underneath. Third photo, inside one of the structures. The suit lights illuminated what looked like a corridor, walls covered in markings similar to what Webb had carved into his hand. And bodies. Lots of bodies, preserved in the airless environment, wearing spacesuits that looked exactly like the ones the Apollo crews had worn. I picked up another photo, my hands trembling now. This one showed a close-up of one body's name tag, Commander J. Walker, Apollo 18. They found themselves, Webb said. That's what the photos show. They found their own corpses on the moon. I spread out more photographs, watching the story unfold in sequential nightmare. The astronauts running, their shadows moving wrong, not following their bodies but reaching ahead, stretching toward the lunar module like they were racing their owners. A shot inside the spacecraft during takeoff, 3 astronauts visible but a 4th suit sitting in the cabin, helmet dark, too many hands pressed against the interior glass. The final photograph made my vision blur. It showed Earth from lunar orbit, our planet hanging in the black void. But there was something wrong with it. The continents were in the wrong positions, rotated maybe 30 degrees from where they should be. Or we were looking at Earth from a different angle than any Apollo mission had ever achieved. Webb, we need to... They called last night. His eyes finally met mine, and I saw the terror there. Someone from Houston. Said they were sending a team to collect the photographs. Said if I told anyone, my sister's kids in Austin would... He stopped, swallowed hard. I told them I'd already destroyed everything. Did you? He laughed, high and brittle. These are copies. I hid the originals in 3 different locations. Because fuck them, you know? Fuck NASA. Fuck whoever's been lying about this for 50 years. The shop's phone rang, loud in the silence. Neither of us moved. It rang 6 times, then stopped. Webb handed me a manila envelope. Get out of here. Don't come back. And whatever you do, don't look at the photos when the moon's up. Why? Because, he said, they look back. I didn't go home. Couldn't. The envelope Webb gave me sat on my passenger seat like a loaded gun while I drove aimlessly through Clear Lake, past the decrepit motels and seafood shacks that had been dying since the shuttle program ended. The dashboard clock read 2:47 p.m. In 6 hours, the moon would rise. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "We know you have them." I threw the phone out the window. Stupid, maybe, but the panic was setting in. If they'd called Webb, they knew about me. They knew I'd brought the canister to him, which meant they'd been watching the archive, maybe for days, waiting to see who'd be dumb enough to process that film. I needed answers, real ones, the kind you couldn't find in sanitized NASA databases. Eddie Garrett lived in a shotgun house near Seabrook, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their business and didn't ask questions. He'd been a flight controller during Apollo, worked the EECOM console, monitoring electrical and environmental systems. After he'd retired, he'd become something of a conspiracy theorist, the guy who showed up at Space Center events with homemade pamphlets about classified missions and deleted telemetry data. Most people thought he was crazy. I'd always thought he might be onto something. His house smelled like cigarettes and old coffee. Books covered every surface. Technical manuals, mission transcripts, photos of control rooms from the 60s. Eddie himself looked like he hadn't slept in years, his grey beard unkempt, his eyes sharp and paranoid behind thick glasses. Holden Parrish. He studied me from his doorway. "You're that kid who works nights at the archive. You finally ready to admit your bosses have been lying?" "I need to ask you about Apollo 18. His expression changed. The door started to close. "Wait." I jammed my foot in the gap. "I have photographs. From the mission. The actual mission." The door opened again, slowly. "Get inside. Now." His living room had been converted into a makeshift research center. One wall was covered in newspaper clippings, mission patches, photocopied documents connected by red string. I recognized some of it. News articles about cancelled Apollo missions, budget reports, obituaries of astronauts who died in mysterious circumstances years after the program ended. "Show me," Eddie said. I spread the photographs on his coffee table, my hands trembling slightly. He put on white cotton gloves before touching them. Careful, reverent, like handling religious artifacts. "Christ." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Christ, you actually found them. You knew about this?" "Knew?" He laughed bitterly. "I was on console when they launched. July 15th, 1973, 3 years after the official cancellation. They ran the mission under a different designation, called it a military satellite deployment, kept most of the normal controllers in the dark. But I had access to the environmental data, saw the life support signatures, 3 men breathing, eating, sleeping, a trajectory that matched lunar insertion." He picked up the photo showing the structures in the crater. They were going to the far side, crater Daedalus, near the limb. Soviet probes had detected something there in '68, radio emissions at frequencies that didn't match anything natural. The CIA got involved, made it a national security issue. What were they looking for? Eddie's finger traced the geometric shapes in the photograph. First, they thought it might be Soviet, a secret base maybe, but the emissions were too old. The isotope decay analysis suggested whatever was broadcasting had been there for millions of years. So they sent Walker and his crew to check it out. And they found their own bodies. That's the part I never understood. He pulled out a file folder from beneath a stack of books. The mission lasted 8 days, normal duration for a lunar landing. Telemetry showed nominal performance right up until they left lunar orbit. Then silence. Nothing. The official story was they'd burned up on re-entry due to heat shield failure. Bodies never recovered. He opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of what looked like medical reports. But 6 months later, Commander Walker turned up at a VA hospital in Albuquerque. Couldn't remember his own name. Kept drawing these symbols on the walls with his own blood. Eddie showed me a sketch. The same geometric markings from the photographs, from Webb's palm, from my own forearms. Where is he now? Dead. Suicide officially. Hung himself in the hospital psychiatric ward, but the orderly who found him said his body was facing the window, and his shadow on the wall was still moving for 20 minutes after they cut him down. Outside, I heard a car pull up, then another. Eddie heard it too. He moved to the window, peeked through the blinds. Shit, federal plates. You brought them right to me. I wasn't followed. Doesn't matter now. He grabbed the photographs, shoving them back into the envelope along with his file folder. Take these. There's a storm drain in the backyard, third panel from the oak tree. Lift it, you'll find a crawl space that connects to the neighbor's yard. Go. What about you? I've been waiting for them for 30 years. He pulled a revolver from his desk drawer. Time to ask them some direct questions. Someone knocked on the front door. Professional, patient, 3 measured raps. Go, Eddie hissed. I went. The storm drain was exactly where he'd said. I dropped into darkness, landing in 6 inches of stagnant water that soaked through my shoes. Behind me, I heard muffled voices, then a gunshot that made me flinch so hard I nearly dropped the envelope. The crawl space was tight, claustrophobic. I crawled through mud and roots, and the skeletal remains of a cat, finally emerging in the neighbor's backyard. An elderly man was watering his garden. He looked at me, muddy, panicked, clearly running from something, and calmly turned his hose back to his roses. Noticed you coming, he said in a thick Vietnamese accent. The men in suits, they know good. Take my fence. He gestured to a loose board. Go 3 houses down, there's a construction site. You disappear there, okay? I wanted to thank him, to ask how he knew, but there wasn't time. I squeezed through the fence, ran across 2 more yards, and emerged on a street I didn't recognize. The construction site was there, a half-built townhouse complex, abandoned for the evening. I found a portable toilet that hadn't been serviced in weeks, locked myself inside, and finally let myself breathe. The envelope was still in my hands. I pulled out Eddie's file folder, flipped through the pages by the fading light. There were more names, other crew members who'd worked on Dark Arrow. Most were marked deceased, accidents mostly. Heart attacks, car crashes, 1 drowning. But 3 names had question marks next to them. Dr. Simon Voss, mission planning. Luis Delgado, recovery operations. Thomas Brooke, communications. Someone had written a note in the margin. Relocated under witness protection, 1974. Current whereabouts, unknown. I pulled out my phone. No, wait, I'd thrown it away, right. There was a payphone outside a gas station 2 blocks over. I fed it quarters, dialed the archive's emergency line. My supervisor, Greg, picked up on the 4th ring. Holden? Where the hell are you? There are federal agents here asking about... Don't tell them anything. I need you to search our database for 3 names. I read them off. What's this about? Apollo 18, the real mission. It happened, Greg. It actually happened, and people have been dying to keep it quiet. Silence on the line, then... Holden, you need to hear something. That film canister you processed. I checked the donation records. Bobby Thorne didn't just donate it randomly. Someone paid him $5,000 to make sure it ended up on your desk specifically. The quarters in my hand felt heavy, cold. Why me? I don't know, but whoever set this up wanted you to find those photographs. Wanted you to see what's on them. He paused. There's something else. The Johnson Space Center just announced a press conference for tomorrow morning. Emergency briefing about new lunar reconnaissance data. They're saying amateur astronomers detected something on the far side, near crater Daedalus. My reflection stared back at me from the gas station window. In the glass, I could see the moon rising behind me, pale and gibbous. I looked down at my forearms. The symbols I'd carved 3 days ago. No, wait. I'd carved them 3 days from now, after Webb's warning. Time was getting confused, looping back on itself. The photographs in my hand felt warm now, almost alive. And somewhere above, on that silver disc climbing into the Texas sky, something was moving in the dust. Something that had been waiting 50 years to be seen again. I stayed in that construction site until midnight, watching the moon climb higher through gaps in the unfinished walls. The photographs had started doing something strange, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, details changing position like they were taken from a different angle each time I blinked. Webb's warning echoed in my head, don't look at them when the moon's up. Too late for that now. My forearms burned where I'd carved the symbols, except I hadn't carved them yet. That happened 3 days from now, in the police station bathroom before they found me in the Rio Grande. Time was becoming unreliable, slippery. I could remember things that hadn't happened and forget things that had. I needed to check on Webb, make sure he was okay. The rational part of my brain knew he probably wasn't. The blood on his hands, the symbols carved into his palm, the vacant look in his eyes. But I had to know. NASA Road 1 was nearly empty at this hour. Webb's photo lab sat dark between the still-open Vietnamese restaurant and the bail bonds office with its neon sign flickering. I parked a block away, approached on foot. The front door was unlocked. Not a good sign. Webb? The dark room light was still red. Photographs covered every surface now, not just the floor. Someone had taped them to the walls, the ceiling, arranging them in a pattern that made my vision swim when I tried to follow it. The images formed something, a map maybe, or a circuit diagram. The crater from the photos appeared dozens of times, each iteration showing it from a slightly different angle, creating a three-dimensional effect that hurt to process. Webb was still on the floor. He'd carved more symbols since I'd left. His arms were covered in them now, geometric precision despite the obvious pain it must have caused. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. Hello everyone. So, if you like some real news and updates related to outer space and the cosmos, please check out our friend's channel mentioned in the card and at the video end. Enjoy. They came back, he said. His voice sounded hollow, like it was travelling through water. After you left, the men in suits. They asked about the photographs and I told them I destroyed them. But they knew I was lying. Webb, we need to get you to a hospital. They showed me their credentials. Department of Defense, they said. But their badges were wrong. The photos on the IDs weren't them. Not exactly. Like they were slightly out of phase with themselves. He finally looked at me, and I wished he hadn't. His pupils were different sizes, reflecting light at wrong angles. They asked where you went. I didn't tell them, so they showed me something instead. He reached behind him, pulled out another photograph. This one wasn't from the canister. It was recent, digital, printed on regular photo paper. It showed Webb's house. His actual house, the one in Pearland where he lived with his boyfriend, taken from across the street. A man stood in the driveway. Webb himself, except the image quality was strange. Blurred, like the person was vibrating at a frequency the camera couldn't capture. That was taken yesterday, Webb said, but I was here yesterday. Working. Didn't go home until after 10, so who the fuck is that? I didn't have an answer. My hands shook as I set the photograph down. There's more. Webb stood on unsteady legs, led me to the enlarger. He'd been working on something when I'd arrived. A new print, still wet in the development tray. I went back to the negatives, scanned them at maximum resolution, found something in the background of the lunar module photo, the one with the fourth astronaut. He lifted the print with tongs, held it under the red light. The image showed the interior of the spacecraft, blown up until the grain was visible. The mystery figure in Commander Walker's suit sat in the rear cabin, helmet dark. But Webb had focused on the reflection in the control panel glass. You could see inside the helmet, not a face, faces, plural. 3 of them, overlapping, shifting position like a deck of cards being shuffled. All 3 looked like Commander Walker, but at different ages. One young, maybe 30, one middle-aged, one elderly, skin drawn tight over skull. They're the same person, Webb said. Different points in his timeline, existing simultaneously. That's what happened to the Apollo 18 crew. They didn't just find their corpses on the moon. They found every version of themselves that ever went there. Past, present, future, all collapsed into the same location. That's not possible. Yeah? Webb laughed, high-pitched and broken. Then explain this. He grabbed my wrist, twisted it so I could see my own forearm. The symbols I'd carved, the ones I remembered carving 3 days in the future, were glowing faintly. Not light exactly, More like they were generating a negative space, a darkness that radiated outward. "They're coordinates," Webb said. "I figured it out. Each symbol represents a specific point in lunar geography. When you carve them, when you internalize them, you're creating a connection, opening a channel." "To what?" "To there, to the crater, to whatever's been waiting in Daedalus for millions of years." He released my arm, stumbled backward. "The Apollo 18 crew found something that exists outside normal time, a place where past and future overlap. And by looking at these photographs, by processing them, developing them, studying them, we've created the same connection they did." The shop's phone rang. We both froze. It rang 3 times, then stopped, then started again. Webb walked to it like a man approaching the gallows. He picked up the receiver, listened for maybe 5 seconds, then hung up without speaking. "That was me," he said quietly. "My voice. Calling from the moon, telling me not to develop the film. That's not... It's starting, Holden. The loop. We're inside it now." He walked to the wall, started pulling down photographs with mechanical precision. "You need to understand something. I'm not supposed to be here. Not anymore. I died in this shop 3 days ago. Stroke, they said. Found me on the floor surrounded by photographs. But I'm still here because the timeline is corrupted. Because looking at these images created a paradox. And now there are multiple versions of me, of you, of everyone who's seen them." He turned to face me fully. In the red light, I could see it. His edges weren't quite solid. Like he was a photograph himself, starting to fade. "You have to destroy them, all of them, every copy, every negative, every digital file. Burn them before more people see them, before the loop expands to include..." The front door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered. They moved with an unsettling synchronization, their footsteps perfectly matched. As they passed under the shop's fluorescent lights, I saw what Webb had meant about being out of phase. Their shadows fell at wrong angles, multiple overlapping silhouettes that didn't correspond to any visible light source. "Mr. Garrett, Mr. Parrish." The first one spoke, his voice flat and artificial. "You have materials that belong to the Department of Defense. We need to collect them." "Fuck you," Webb said. He'd grabbed a container of developer solution, held it like a weapon. "You're not collecting anything. You're not even real. You're just echoes, fragments left over from..." The second man moved faster than anything human should. One moment he was by the door, the next he was behind Webb, one hand on his shoulder. Webb screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly as his body went rigid. His skin started to crack. Not blood, light. Bright, sterile light leaking through fissures that spread across his face and hands like breaking glass. The symbols he'd carved began to glow, forming a circuit across his body. "The photographs," the first man said to me, ignoring Webb's transformation. "Give them to us, and we can stop this. Keep them, and what's happening to your friend will happen to everyone who's seen them. The loop will expand until it includes your entire city." Webb's eyes met mine one last time. In them, I saw recognition, acceptance, and something else, a warning. His lips moved, forming words without sound. "They're lying." Then he came apart, not violently, gently, almost beautifully, like he was dissolving into light. The pieces of him lifted upward, floating toward the ceiling, and for just a moment, I could see through him to the wall beyond. In that transparency, I glimpsed other versions of Webb standing in different positions, at different ages, all occupying the same space. Then he was gone. Just gone. Nothing left but his empty clothes collapsed on the floor and the smell of ozone. The men in suits turned their attention to me. "The photographs," one repeated. I still had the envelope. My hands clutched it so hard the edges crumpled. Every instinct screamed at me to give it to them, to end this nightmare, to prevent what had happened to Webb from happening to me. But I thought about Eddie, about Walker dying in that hospital, about 50 years of lies and covered-up deaths, about the fact that these things, whatever they were, had just erased my friend from existence and expected me to trust them. "No," I said. I ran. Out the back door, through the alley, into the parking lot where my car sat waiting. The men didn't chase me. at least not in any normal way. But as I peeled out onto NASA Road 1, I saw them in my rearview mirror. They were standing in the middle of the street watching me go, and they were smiling, like they'd expected this, like I'd done exactly what they wanted. My phone, no, I'd thrown it away. But there was another phone in the envelope, I realized. A burner, prepaid. Webb must have tucked it in with Eddie's files. It was ringing. I answered while driving, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Holden Parrish. The voice on the other end was old, raspy, weathered. My name is Thomas Brooke. I was the communications director for Dark Arrow. I know what you've seen and I know what you're carrying. Don't give those photographs to anyone. Don't destroy them either. You need to bring them to me. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the last person alive who knows how to stop this. And because in 3 hours, the moon will be directly overhead. When that happens, everyone in Houston who's seen those images will experience what your friend just did. They'll collapse into their own timelines, cease to exist in linear fashion. Where are you? Galveston, the old pleasure pier. Come alone, and for God's sake, don't look at the photographs again until you get here. The line went dead. I drove south toward the coast, toward answers I probably didn't want. Behind me, the moon shone down on Houston with patient, malevolent hunger. And somewhere in my mind, I could feel Webb's absence, not like he'd died, but like he'd never existed at all. The worst part was I was already starting to forget his face. The Galveston pleasure pier jutted into the Gulf like a broken promise, half its attractions shuttered since the last hurricane. I parked in a nearly empty lot, the ocean wind carrying salt and decay through my open window. 2 in the morning. The moon hung directly overhead now, bloated and accusing. Thomas Brooke sat on a bench near the end of the pier, feeding pieces of a sandwich to seagulls that shouldn't have been awake at this hour. He looked ancient, maybe 80, maybe older, his skin like yellowed paper stretched over bone, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. You made good time. He didn't stand, didn't offer to shake hands. Show me what you brought. I sat beside him, pulled out the envelope. He handled the photographs with practiced care, studying each one with the intensity of someone reading a foreign language they'd nearly forgotten. Christ, these are the originals. I thought they'd destroyed all of them. He set one photo down, the image of the astronauts finding their own corpses. Do you understand what you're looking at, Mr. Parrish? Dead men finding themselves. A temporal loop. Close. But not quite. He pointed to the structures in the crater wall. These weren't built by humans. They weren't built by anything from Earth. What Walker and his crew found in Daedalus was an anchor point, a place where multiple timelines intersect, where past and future exist simultaneously. A trap, essentially. A trap for what? For us. Brooke pulled out his own photographs from inside his jacket. These were different, showing mission control, telemetry screens, data printouts covered in alarming red marks. The Apollo 18 mission launched July 15, 1973. But here's what we didn't tell anyone. It wasn't the first time we'd sent that crew to the moon. It was the 7th. What? Each time they launched, they'd reach Daedalus crater, find the structures, enter them, and discover their own bodies from previous attempts. Then something would happen. They'd lose contact with Earth, or their life support would fail, or they'd simply vanish from our tracking. So we'd reset, launch them again with modified equipment, different mission parameters. But the outcome was always the same. That's impossible. You can't just erase a failed mission and try again. Brooke smiled grimly. That's exactly what Dark Arrow was designed to do. We developed a technique, crude, dangerous, but functional. Using intense electromagnetic pulses at specific lunar orbital positions, we could create temporal reversion windows. Small ones, 48 hours maximum. Just enough to undo a disaster and try a different approach. He showed me a photograph of Mission Control dated July 17, 1973. The controllers looked exhausted, traumatized. Several had blood trickling from their noses. 7 attempts, 7 failures. On the 8th try, something different happened. Walker and his crew found the structures, entered them, discovered their own corpses as expected. But this time, they didn't die. They reported finding something else inside, a chamber at the center, filled with what looked like mirrors. Except the reflections weren't them. They were other versions of Earth, other timelines where history had gone differently, some where the Apollo program never existed, some where the moon itself was gone, just empty space where it should have been. Jesus! Walker touched one of the mirrors. Brooks' hands shook slightly as he spoke. Just touched it, and instantly we lost telemetry. Everything went dark. When the signal came back 16 hours later, Walker was alone in the lunar module. His crewmates were gone. And he was different, speaking in languages we didn't recognize, drawing those symbols you've carved into your arms. I looked down at my forearms. The geometric marks had spread since earlier, forming new patterns I didn't remember making. We managed to guide him back to Earth, Brooke continued, but the person who landed in the Pacific wasn't entirely Walker anymore. He was multiple Walkers, superimposed. Every version of himself that had gone to that crater, all occupying the same body. It drove him insane within weeks. And you covered it up. We had to. The mirror Walker touched, it didn't just affect him. It created a resonance. Anyone who learned about what happened, anyone who saw evidence of it, began experiencing the same temporal collapse. Small at first, memories shifting, time feeling unreliable. But it progressed. Eddie Garrett lasted longest, almost 30 years before the displacement became fatal. Others weren't so lucky. He gestured to the photographs in my lap. These images are contaminated, not chemically, conceptually. Looking at them creates a connection to that chamber on the moon. The more you study them, the stronger the link becomes. Eventually, you'll start to see yourself in those mirrors, different versions of you making different choices. And once that happens, the timeline splits. You cease to exist as a singular entity. Webb already... My voice cracked. He dissolved. Just came apart. I know, I felt it happen. Brooke tapped his temple. Everyone connected to Dark Arrow has a link. We're all part of the same contaminated timeline. When one of us collapses, the rest of us feel the gap where they used to be. Why am I still okay? I've been looking at these for days. You're not okay? He grabbed my wrist, pulled back my sleeve. The symbols had spread to my shoulder now, crawling across my skin like living circuitry. You're just slower to collapse than most, probably genetic. Some people have more temporal resilience than others. But you're running out of time. Another 6 hours, maybe less, and you'll start seeing the mirrors yourself. The seagulls had stopped eating. They stood in a circle around us, completely still, watching with eyes that reflected moonlight at unnatural angles. So, what do I do? Destroy the photographs? Won't work. The connection already exists. Burning them would be like trying to cure cancer by covering the tumor. The damage is already spreading through your timeline. He stood, bones creaking. There's only one way to stop this. You have to go there. To the moon, to Daedalus Crater, and you have to close the chamber. I laughed, couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh, desperate. That's insane. I'm not an astronaut. I catalogue dead people's space junk for minimum wage. You're connected now. The chamber will recognize that. And unlike Walker and his crew, you know what you're walking into. You have a chance to resist the temporal displacement, at least long enough to shut down the mirrors. He pulled out a business card, handed it to me. There's a man in League City, Dr. Simon Voss, former mission planning for Dark Arrow. He's been building something in his garage for 40 years. An escape pod, basically. Refurbished Apollo hardware combined with stolen SpaceX components. Completely off book, unregistered. He can get you to the moon. This is crazy. Yes. Brooke met my eyes. But it's your only option. Because here's the part I haven't told you yet. The NASA press conference tomorrow morning isn't about new lunar discoveries. It's about the footprints. What footprints? Yesterday, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed fresh disturbances in Daedalus crater, footprints leading from the chamber to the Apollo 18 descent stage. Human footprints, made less than 48 hours ago. He paused. Made by Commander Walker. Or what's left of him, still trapped in that temporal loop, still trying to escape. He's been dead for 50 years. Dead, alive. Those terms don't mean much when you're existing across multiple timelines simultaneously. Walker is still there, Holden. Still trapped in that chamber, experiencing every version of his mission at once. And now that the photographs are circulating, now that the connection is spreading, he's getting stronger, more coherent. If enough people see those images, if the resonance grows large enough, he'll be able to reach across the timeline gap, to manifest here on Earth. What happens then? Then Earth becomes like the chamber, a place where all possible timelines exist simultaneously, where every version of every person occupies the same space. Reality collapses into quantum foam. Brooks' voice was flat, resigned. We calculated the threshold. If 3,000 people see those photographs, the cascade becomes irreversible. Right now, about 400 have seen them. The images went online 6 hours ago. By morning, you'll hit critical mass. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. The men in suits, the ones who visited your friend Webb, they're not government agents. They're echoes of the original Dark Arrow team. People like me, but from timelines where they failed to contain the contamination. They're trying to stop you because in their version of events, someone like you makes it worse. But they don't understand. In this timeline, you're the only variable that might work. He walked away down the pier, his shadow stretching long behind him. But I noticed he cast 2 shadows, from 2 different light sources that shouldn't exist. I sat there holding the photographs, feeling the symbols burn across my skin. Somewhere above, the moon watched, and somewhere on its far side, in a crater that officially didn't contain anything unusual, something that used to be human waited in a chamber of broken mirrors. My phone rang, not Brooks' burner, my actual phone, the one I'd thrown out the car window hours ago. I answered anyway. Hello, Holden. The voice was mine, but wrong. Like hearing yourself on a recording, but worse. I'm calling from the chamber. I'm you. 48 hours from now. Listen carefully. Whatever Brooke told you, he's lying about one thing. You can't close the chamber, but you can enter it. And if you do, if you let yourself collapse into the mirrors, you can take the contamination with you. Trap it inside a single timeline where it can't spread, but it means you'll be stuck there, every version of you forever experiencing all possible outcomes simultaneously. Why would I do that? Because I already did. And I'm calling to tell you it's worth it. The alternative is worse. The line went dead. I looked at the business card Brooke had given me. Dr. Simon Voss, League City. An address in a residential neighborhood, probably some old guy's garage workshop where he'd spent decades building an impossible escape vehicle. I had 6 hours until the timeline fractured, until I started seeing the mirrors myself. 6 hours to decide if I was crazy enough to try reaching the moon. Dr. Simon Voss lived in a ranch house that looked like every other ranch house in League City. Beige siding, dying lawn, a mailbox that leaned at 45 degrees. The only unusual detail was the industrial power line running from the street transformer directly to his garage, thick as a man's wrist. I knocked at 3 a.m. No response. Knocked again, harder. The door opened 6 inches, security chain engaged. A man's face appeared in the gap, gaunt, severe, with eyes that had the particular intensity of someone who hadn't slept properly in decades. Holden Parrish, he said, not a question. Brooke called, said you'd be coming. He studied me for a long moment. Let me see your arms. I rolled up my sleeves. The symbols had spread further since Galveston, covering both forearms completely now, starting to creep toward my elbows. They pulsed faintly in rhythm with my heartbeat. Voss's expression tightened. Advanced stage, you've got maybe 4 hours before displacement becomes irreversible. He unhooked the chain, opened the door fully. Come on, We don't have time to waste." His house smelled like solder and ozone. Every surface was covered in technical manuals, circuit boards, handwritten calculations that covered entire walls. Photos of the Apollo missions were everywhere, but someone had drawn corrections on them. Trajectory adjustments, equipment modifications, annotations in a cramped, obsessive hand. "Through here," Voss said, leading me toward the garage. He opened the door and I stopped breathing. The garage had been converted into something between a workshop and a shrine. In the center sat what looked like an Apollo command module, except it had been rebuilt, modified, pieces of it replaced with components I didn't recognize. The heat shield was newer, composite materials that wouldn't have existed in the 70s. The hull showed welding marks where someone had reinforced it, and attached to the back was a propulsion system that looked like someone had gutted a SpaceX Dragon capsule and grafted its guts onto Cold War hardware. 43 years, Voss said quietly. "That's how long I've been building this. Started the day after Walker died, after they shut down Dark Arrow and told us to pretend none of it happened. But I knew someone would eventually need to go back, to finish what we started. This thing actually works. In theory." He climbed a ladder to access the upper hatch. "I've tested every component individually. The trajectory calculations are solid. Launch to lunar orbit in 68 hours using a modified Hohmann transfer. The hard part is launching from Earth without anyone noticing." "How the hell do you plan to—" "I don't. You do." He pulled out a pressure suit, also modified, patches of newer material sewn into the vintage design. This was Walker's backup suit. I've kept it maintained, upgraded the life support systems. Should fit you. You're about his size. The suit felt heavy in my hands, wrong somehow, like it carried the weight of all those failed timelines. "Walk me through the launch," I said. Voss descended the ladder, moved to a control panel that looked like it had been salvaged from mission control. The capsule is mounted on a mobile platform in my backyard. It's covered by a tarp and some strategic landscaping, but it's functional. Launch sequence takes approximately 6 minutes from ignition to orbital insertion. The first stage separates at 170,000 feet. Second stage burns until... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had locked onto something behind me. I turned. The man in the suit stood in the garage doorway. Same dark government outfit, same unsettling synchronization with his own shadow. But this close, I could see the details that marked him as impossible, the way his edges seemed to blur slightly, how his tie clip reflected light that wasn't in the room. "Dr. Voss," he said, "we need to discuss your project." Voss's hand moved to a tool bench wrapped around what looked like a welding torch. "Get out of my house. You've been building this escape vehicle for 43 years. The suit man stepped inside, and I noticed his footsteps didn't make any sound. Every component carefully selected, every calculation triple-checked. But you made one critical error. "Bullshit. The temporal resonance." The suit man gestured at the capsule. "You've been working on this machine in a timeline contaminated by Dark Arrow. Every piece of it, every wire and bolt and circuit carries that contamination. You think you're building a way to reach the chamber, but you're actually building a beacon, an amplifier for the very phenomenon you're trying to contain." Voss's face went pale. "No, I've shielded everything, used non-conductive materials for the critical components. Doesn't matter." The suit man's voice was patient, almost kind. "The contamination isn't physical. It's conceptual. The act of building this machine, of planning a mission to return to Daedalus, creates a link across timelines. You've been strengthening the resonance for 4 decades without realizing it. You're lying." But Voss's voice wavered. "Am I?" The suit man pulled out a device, something like a Geiger counter, but the readings were color-coded, shifting between purple and deep red. He pointed it at the capsule. The needle buried itself in the red zone. "This craft is saturated. If you launch it, if you take it anywhere near the moon, the chamber will lock onto its signal. Instead of closing the loop, you'll tear it wide open." I felt sick. "So what do we do?" "Nothing." The suit man looked at me. "You stop." You destroy the photographs, you dismantle this machine, and you let the contamination run its natural course through the small number of people already exposed. Acceptable losses, tragic, but containable. Fuck that, I said. People are dying. People are always dying, Mr. Parrish. The question is whether you want to limit it to a few dozen casualties or expand it to encompass the entire human species. Voss had backed up against his control panel. His hand hovered over something I couldn't see. There's another option, he said quietly. One I built in as a failsafe. The suit man's expression changed. Simon, don't... Voss hit the button. The garage exploded with sound and light. Not the capsule launching. Something else. Every piece of equipment in the room activated simultaneously. Monitors flickered to life showing mission telemetry from 1973. Speakers blared with recorded communications from Walker's crew. And the capsule itself began to vibrate, its hull resonating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. The suit man staggered, his form flickering like bad reception. You bastard, he said. You're trying to overload the local timeline, create interference. Correct. Voss's voice was steady now, committed. I recorded every piece of Dark Arrow data I could find. Mission logs, telemetry, voice recordings, everything. Been playing it back subliminally through speakers hidden in these walls for 40 years. Not loud enough to hear consciously, but enough to saturate the local space-time with competing temporal information. The suit man was coming apart. His edges were dissolving, multiple versions of him becoming visible. Older, younger, wearing different clothes, standing in slightly different positions. This won't stop anything, you'll just create more contamination. That's the point. Voss grabbed my arm, pulled me toward the capsule. The contamination operates on resonance, like attracts like. If I generate enough interference, enough competing signals, the chamber will lose its lock on you specifically. You'll be able to approach it without triggering total cascade. But you're killing yourself. I could see it happening. Voss was starting to blur too, his form becoming unstable. I've been dead since 1973, just took me a while to notice. He practically shoved me toward the pressure suit. Put it on. Now. The interference will only last about 90 seconds before I collapse completely. I wanted to argue, to find another way, but the suit man was already dissolving into light, screaming something about timelines and catastrophe. Voss was right behind him, his skin taking on that same breaking glass quality I'd seen with Webb. I stripped down to my shorts and climbed into Walker's suit. The material was cold, clingy in ways that felt almost invasive. Voss helped me seal the seams, his hands moving with practiced efficiency even as they began to fade. Listen carefully, he said. His voice was already taking on that hollow, distant quality. The launch is automated. Strap in, hit the green button, and don't touch anything else. The trajectory is locked. You'll reach lunar orbit in 68 hours. Once you're there, you'll see the descent stage from the original Apollo 18 mission. It's still there, still functional. Use it to land at Daedalus. And then what? Then you go into the chamber, and you make a choice. His face was barely visible now, light leaking through the cracks in his substance. You can try to close the mirrors, seal them permanently. But Brooke was right, it probably won't work. Or you can do what your future self said. You can enter them. Let yourself collapse into every possible timeline simultaneously. Become a container for the contamination. Why would I do that? Voss smiled, and in that smile I saw every version of him that had existed across every attempted timeline. Because otherwise, 3,000 people see those photographs by dawn, and every single one of them experiences what I'm experiencing right now. Infinite versions of themselves, all conscious, all suffering, all trapped between moments forever. He reached up, grabbed the hatch above us. Go! Save them, even if you can't save yourself. He slammed the hatch shut. Through the small window, I watched him walk to the control panel. His form was almost completely transparent now, a ghost of light and geometry. He hit a series of switches, and the garage began to fold open. a hidden mechanism I hadn't noticed, the roof splitting apart to reveal the night sky. The moon hung directly overhead, full and bright and hungry. I fumbled with the straps, locked myself into Walker's seat. My hands found the green button on the control panel, right where Voss said it would be. Outside, Voss raised one hand, a salute or a farewell or maybe an apology. Then he vanished, just gone, erased from existence, leaving nothing but an empty garage and the sound of the countdown timer clicking down. 5 seconds. 4. 3. I thought about Webb, about Eddie, about Walker dying in that hospital, about 50 years of lies and covered-up deaths, about everyone who'd looked at those photographs and didn't know they were already contaminated, already starting their slow dissolution into temporal static. 2. 1. The world exploded into acceleration. G-forces crushed me into the seat as the modified rocket engines ignited, propelling the capsule up through the open garage roof with enough force to shatter every window in a 3-block radius. The neighborhood blurred past, then League City, then the entire Gulf Coast, shrinking into a carpet of lights below. The suit held, the capsule held. The trajectory calculations were perfect. Voss had spent 43 years making sure of that. But as I broke through the atmosphere and the stars emerged around me, cold and indifferent, I felt something shift in my chest. The symbols on my arms burned hot, spreading across my torso now, writing themselves into my skin without my permission. And in the capsule's reflection, in the curved glass of the control panel, I saw myself. All of me. Every version. The Holden who'd never opened that film canister. The one who'd given the photographs to the suit men. The one who died in Webb's shop alongside him. The one who was already in the chamber waiting for himself to arrive. They were all me, and they were all real, and they were all screaming. Ahead, the moon grew larger. Behind me, Earth receded into darkness. And somewhere in between, the timeline fractured just a little bit more. 63 hours into the journey, I stopped being able to tell which memories were mine. The capsule drifted in lunar orbit, systems humming their mechanical lullaby. Through the window, the moon's far side rotated slowly into view, grey and scarred and utterly hostile to human life. Somewhere down there, in Daedalus Crater, the chamber waited. I floated in microgravity, the pressure suit chafing against skin that no longer felt entirely solid. The symbols had spread across my entire body now, glowing circuits of geometry that pulsed in time with something that wasn't quite my heartbeat. When I closed my eyes, I saw other versions of this moment, me in the capsule, but the interior was different. Older equipment, newer equipment, no equipment at all, just me floating in vacuum, somehow still alive. The radio crackled, static mostly, but occasionally voices emerged from the noise. Apollo 18, this is Houston, do you copy? Walker, talk to me, what are you seeing? Trajectory unstable, abort, abort, abort. Ghosts of transmissions from 1973 leaking through the temporal interference. I'd been hearing them for the past 20 hours, ever since crossing into cislunar space. Sometimes they were responses to things I hadn't said yet. Sometimes they were warnings about events that had already happened. I activated the capsule's communication system, knowing it was stupid, knowing there was nobody on Earth who could help me now. This is Holden Parish, I said. If anyone can hear this, I'm approaching Daedalus Crater on the lunar far side. What was I? Contaminated, infected, coming apart at the seams of reality. I'm going in, I finished. The static shifted. Someone was listening. Holden. The voice was mine, but older, stretched thin across what sounded like decades of wear. This is you. From inside the chamber. I need you to understand something before you land. I'm listening. You think you're going there to contain the contamination, to trap it inside yourself and save everyone else. But that's not what happens. The chamber isn't a prison. It's a junction point. When you enter it, when you let yourself collapse into the mirrors, you don't just experience every version of yourself. You become the connection between them. A living bridge across timelines. What does that mean? It means you'll be conscious in every possible timeline simultaneously. Every choice you ever made or didn't make. Every version of Earth where history went differently. You'll experience all of it, forever, unable to distinguish between what's real and what's possible. I thought about Webb, about how he'd come apart, about Voss vanishing into light, about Walker hanging in that hospital, his shadow still moving after he died. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know what you're sacrificing. Not just your life, your singular existence, your ability to be one person, in one place, making one choice at a time. You'll lose that forever. Silence, then. But you'll also understand something no human has ever understood. You'll see the whole shape of time, the entire architecture of causality, and maybe, you'll find a way to close the loop from the inside. Has anyone ever done it? Closed it? I don't know. I'm still here, still trapped, still trying. But I've been trying for... Static consumed his words. When it cleared, his voice was different, younger. 3 minutes now, and I think I found something. A pattern in the mirrors. A way to... The transmission cut out. I floated there, alone again, watching the moon grow larger in the window. My brother's voice echoed in my head, not from the radio, from memory. Real memory, before the contamination started blurring everything. You've always been the careful one, Holden. Always planning 3 steps ahead, never taking risks. We'd been at a bar in Houston 3 years ago, before I took the archive job, before Dad died, before everything went to shit. Derek had been trying to convince me to go back to school, get a real degree instead of floating through minimum wage positions. What's wrong with being careful, I'd said. Nothing. Except you're so careful you never actually do anything. You just watch other people live while you catalogue their leftovers. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent my entire life as a spectator. Even my job was about preserving other people's achievements, other people's risks. The closest I'd ever come to space exploration was reading mission reports in a basement. Now I was in orbit around the moon, preparing to descend to a crater that had killed everyone who'd ever visited it, about to make a choice that would either save humanity or accelerate its collapse into temporal chaos. Derek would have been proud, or horrified, maybe both. The descent stage from the original Apollo 18 mission appeared below, exactly where Voss said it would be. The 4-legged spider of metal and foil that had carried Walker's crew to the surface 50 years ago. It looked pristine, preserved by vacuum and the absence of weather. I maneuvered the capsule alongside it, matched velocity, then transferred through the docking adapter into the descent stage itself. The interior was cramped, outdated, covered in switches and dials that predated digital displays. But everything was functional. Voss had been right. The contamination had preserved it, kept it operational across decades. On the control panel, someone had taped a photograph. Not one of the images from the canister. This was different. It showed 3 astronauts on the lunar surface, posing in front of their lander. They were smiling behind their helmet visors, triumphant. I recognized Walker in the center. The other 2 must have been his crewmates, the ones who'd vanished before he returned to Earth alone. Someone had written on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting, "If you're reading this, we're already dead. Don't make the same mistakes we did. Don't touch the mirrors." Too late for that advice. I strapped into the descent pilot's seat, began the landing sequence. The controls were analog, mechanical. I'd practiced on simulators at the archive, back when that felt like harmless historical reenactment rather than actual preparation for suicide. The descent stage separated from the command module with a metallic clunk. I was committed now. No way back to Earth. No way to abort. Just down, into Daedalus Crater, into whatever waited there. The lunar surface rushed up to meet me. Grey dust, black shadows, the absolute silence of a dead world. I saw the structures almost immediately. Geometric shapes built into the crater wall, exactly like the photographs had shown. Perfectly preserved despite being millions of years old, or maybe built yesterday, or maybe existing in every moment simultaneously. And bodies. Dozens of them scattered across the crater floor. Spacesuits in various conditions, some pristine, some corroded, some that looked like they'd been turned inside out. All of them wore Apollo-era equipment. All of them had name tags identifying them as Walker or his crew, or other names I didn't recognize. Different versions from different timelines, all drawn to this same location, all meeting the same fate. I touched down 50 meters from the chamber entrance, a dark opening in the crater wall, rectangular and precise, too regular to be natural. The symbols on my skin blazed bright enough to see through the pressure suit. My hand moved to the hatch release, and I paused. This was it, the point of no return. Once I stepped out onto that lunar surface, once I entered the chamber, I would cease to exist as Holden Parrish from Houston, Texas, who liked Vietnamese food and spent too much time alone and had a dead brother who'd been disappointed in him. I'd become something else, something spread across infinite timelines, experiencing every possible version of my existence simultaneously. I thought about the 3,000 people who'd seen the photographs by now, probably more, the contamination spreading through Houston, through the internet, through every person who'd looked at those images and created a connection to this place. I thought about Webb and Voss and Eddie and Walker dying in that hospital and all the others who'd been erased across 50 years of cover-ups. I thought about my future self, trapped in the chamber, still trying to find a way to close the loop after God knows how long. And I thought about what my brother had said, about being careful, about never taking risks, about cataloguing other people's adventures instead of having my own. Guess I'm done being careful, I said to nobody. I opened the hatch. Lunar gravity was different than I expected. Not quite floating, not quite walking. I bounded across the surface in long, dreamlike strides, leaving footprints in dust that hadn't been disturbed in millions of years. Or had been disturbed yesterday, or would be disturbed tomorrow. Time was meaningless here. The chamber entrance loomed ahead. Inside, I could see reflections, surfaces that caught and bent the light in impossible ways. The mirrors Walker had touched, the source of the contamination, the junction point where all timelines converged. As I approached, I felt something shift in my chest. Not painful exactly, more like something unlocking, coming loose from its moorings. My sense of self was starting to fragment, pieces of me existing in multiple moments simultaneously. I saw myself as a child, learning to ride a bike. I saw myself as an old man, dying in a hospital bed surrounded by family. I saw myself never born, erased from existence, the timeline adjusting around the gap where I should have been. All of it real, all of it happening now. I stepped through the entrance into the chamber. The mirrors surrounded me, thousands of them, maybe millions, stretching into dimensions I couldn't fully perceive. Each one showed a different reflection, a different version of Earth, of humanity, of me. In one, I was still in Houston, safe, having never opened that film canister. In another, I'd given the photographs to the suitmen and Webb was still alive. In another, the Apollo 18 mission had never happened, and none of this existed. And in the center of the chamber, standing among the mirrors, was Commander Walker, or what remained of him. His form flickered between versions, young and old, solid and transparent, one person and many. His spacesuit was simultaneously pristine and decaying. His face was behind the helmet visor, but I could see it anyway. See all his faces layered over each other like shuffled cards. "Welcome," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You made it. Finally. Are you real? Are you?" He gestured at the mirrors surrounding us. "We're both equally real, both equally trapped, both equally trying to find a way out that doesn't involve destroying everything." I looked at my reflection in the nearest mirror, except it wasn't just my reflection. It was every version of me, all occupying the same space, all reaching out toward the glass. "How do we close it?" I asked. Walker's laugh echoed through the chamber, bitter and infinite. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for the last 50 years. Or 50 seconds. Time's a bit unreliable here." He moved closer and I saw the symbols covering his skin too. The same geometric patterns that covered mine, that Webb had carved, that Eddie had drawn on his walls. "The chamber doesn't want to close," Walker said. "It's a natural phenomenon, like a whirlpool or a black hole. It exists because multiple timelines intersected in this exact location, and now it's self-sustaining. Every person who gets trapped here adds more mass to the singularity, makes it stronger." "Then why did you tell me to come here?" "Because," he said, meeting my eyes, There's one thing we haven't tried yet." "What haven't we tried?" I asked. Walker gestured to the mirrors surrounding us. "Look closer. Really look." I approached the nearest one and my reflection stared back. Except it wasn't just me. Behind my reflected shoulder I saw another figure, another person in a pressure suit standing in the same spot I was, but from a different moment. "Every person who enters this chamber leaves a temporal echo," Walker said. "A fragment of themselves locked into the mirror at the moment they arrived. I'm here. My crew is here. Voss visited once, briefly before he realized what it would cost him. His echo is here too." I moved to another mirror. More figures appeared in the reflection, layered behind me like photographic double exposures. Dozens of people in spacesuits, all standing in this exact location across different timelines. "The chamber accumulates consciousness," Walker continued. "It's not destroying us, it's archiving us. Every version of every person who's ever been contaminated by the temporal resonance ends up here eventually, adding to the collection. So we're building a database of human suffering." "Great." "No," Walker's form stabilized for just a moment, became more solid. "We're building critical mass." He walked to the center of the chamber where the mirrors converged into a focal point. The geometric patterns on his skin glowed brighter as he approached. "The chamber is a junction point, multiple timelines intersecting in one location. It draws contaminated consciousness toward itself like gravity. But gravity can be reversed. Black holes can evaporate through Hawking radiation. And temporal singularities can collapse if you introduce enough interference at once. You want to overload it?" "Exactly." Walker placed his hand on the central mirror and the entire chamber shuddered. Voss tried it with recorded data from Earth, created enough noise to blur the signal temporarily, but it wasn't enough. You need actual consciousness, actual human minds experiencing the temporal displacement simultaneously. You need everyone who's been contaminated to enter the chamber at the same moment and reject the mirrors all at once. That's impossible. Most of them are on Earth, 300,000 kilometers away. "Distance doesn't matter here. Time doesn't matter. If you're contaminated, you're already connected to this place. You've always been here, will always be here, are here right now across every timeline." He turned to face me. "The symbols on your skin, they're not just coordinates. They're access points, gates that let your consciousness exist in multiple locations simultaneously." I looked down at my arms. The geometric patterns had spread to my hands now, covering my palms with intricate circuitry. "What do I have to do?" "Stop resisting." Walker's voice was gentle, almost kind. "You've been fighting the displacement, trying to stay singular, trying to remain Holden Parish from Houston instead of Holden Parish from everywhere. But that's exactly what the chamber wants, isolated consciousness it can trap and contain. If you embrace it instead, if you let yourself expand across all timelines at once, you become too large for it to hold. And then what? Then you become the interference. You exist everywhere and nowhere, all versions of yourself, conscious and present simultaneously. And when enough people do that at once, when every contaminated person accepts their displacement and expands beyond containment, the chamber loses cohesion. It can't trap what refuses to be trapped." He stepped back from the central mirror, his edges were starting to blur again. "I've been trying to do this alone for 50 years, but one person isn't enough. I needed more. Needed others to find the chamber, to get contaminated, to bring their consciousness here. That's why I made sure the photographs survived, why I let them spread. I needed 3,000 people to reach the threshold, enough minds experiencing displacement simultaneously to overload the system." The calculation struck me. 3,000. That was the number Brooke mentioned, the cascade point. Brooke thought it would destroy Earth. He was wrong. 3,000 contaminated consciousnesses entering the chamber at once won't spread the displacement. It'll contain it, collapse it inward, turn the temporal singularity inside out until it erases itself from every timeline. "Including us," Walker nodded. "Including us. Everyone who's contaminated will cease to exist in linear time, We'll become something else, scattered across infinite timelines, experiencing every moment simultaneously forever. Not alive, not dead, just present. Everywhere. I thought about Webb, about Voss, about everyone who'd looked at those photographs and didn't know they were already trapped in this nightmare. Is there any other way? If there was, I'd have found it by now. Or by 50 years ago. Or by 10 minutes from now. Walker's smile was sad, ancient. Time's a bit unreliable when you're being erased from it. The chamber shuddered again. Through the mirrors I could see other figures appearing, distant, faint, but definitely there. People on Earth, starting to experience terminal displacement. Their consciousness was reaching across the gap, drawn toward this location by the symbols they'd unknowingly absorbed by looking at the photographs. Webb was there. I could see him, or his echo, standing in his photo lab surrounded by developing trays. Except he was also in his house, and on the street, and nowhere, all at once. Eddie Garrett appeared next, his form fractured into multiple versions overlaying each other. Then more. Dozens. Hundreds. Every person who'd seen the images, who'd created a connection to this place, beginning their slow collapse into the mirrors. "They're coming," Walker said. "The threshold's close. Maybe another hour, maybe less. When it hits 3,000, the cascade will trigger automatically. The chamber will try to absorb them all, lock them into singular positions like it did to me. But if we reject it first, if we expand instead of contract, we create the interference, we become the overload." He met my eyes. "But you have to choose this, Holden. I can't force you. The rejection only works if it's willing, conscious, deliberate. You have to accept what you're becoming and embrace it fully, or it won't generate enough interference to collapse the chamber." I floated there in the low gravity, feeling my sense of self fragmenting like light through a prism. I could see myself in the mirrors, not just my reflection, but every version. The child learning to ride a bike, the teenager who'd watched his brother enlist, the young adult who'd chosen safety over adventure, the old man I'd never become because this moment existed. All of them me, all of them real. "Tell me something," I said. "When you touched the mirror 50 years ago, when you first got trapped here, was it worth it?" Walker considered the question for a long time, or maybe no time at all. "I saved my crew," he said finally. "Not in this timeline, but in others. By getting trapped here, by staying conscious across infinite versions of the mission, I was able to warn other iterations of myself, help them avoid the mistakes that killed me. Some timelines, Apollo 18 never happened. Some, we made it home safely. Some, the chamber was never discovered." He smiled. "Was it worth spending 50 years as a temporal ghost? I don't know. But those other versions of me got to live full lives, have families, grow old. That's something." The chamber shuddered violently. More figures appeared in the mirrors. Hundreds now, maybe thousands. The threshold was approaching fast. I took a breath that existed across multiple timelines, felt it fill lungs that were and weren't there. "Okay," I said, "let's collapse this thing." Walker nodded once, then placed both hands on the central mirror. I did the same. The moment we made contact, everything changed. My consciousness exploded outward, fragmenting into infinite versions simultaneously. I was in the chamber, on the moon, in the descent stage, in Voss's capsule, in my apartment in Houston, in my car on NASA Road 1, in 1,000 places I'd been and 10,000 I'd never visited. I was every age, every choice, every path not taken suddenly taken, every possibility realized. And I wasn't alone. Walker was there. All of him. Every version. Overlapping and distinct. Webb was there. Eddie, Voss, the original Apollo 18 crew. And more people flooding in as the threshold approached, their consciousness reaching across space and time to this focal point. The chamber tried to contain us, tried to trap each fragment in its own mirror, its own isolated timeline, but we rejected it. All of us, simultaneously, deliberately. We expanded instead of contracting, embraced the displacement instead of fighting it. And the chamber couldn't hold. It began to collapse inward, the mirrors shattering in reverse, not breaking into pieces but unbreaking, returning to whatever they'd been before they became a temporal singularity. The geometric patterns that covered my skin, that covered all of us, began to glow brighter and brighter as they generated interference, feedback loops cascading through themselves. I felt the 3,000 threshold hit like a physical impact. 3,000 minds experiencing displacement simultaneously, all rejecting containment at once, all becoming too large to trap. The chamber screamed, a sound that existed in dimensions I didn't have words for. Then it folded, not collapsed. Folded, like origami in reverse, complexity reducing to simplicity, the junction point of infinite timelines condensing down to a single moment of pure causality. The mirrors vanished, the structure vanished, the crater itself vanished, erasing backwards through time until it had never existed at all. And we vanished with it. I stopped being Holden Parrish from Houston, Texas. Started being Holden Parrish from everywhere and nowhere, conscious across infinite timelines, experiencing every moment simultaneously, unable to distinguish between what was real and what was possible because all of it was equally real. I was being born. I was dying. I was meeting my brother for the first time and attending his funeral. I was opening that film canister and deciding to leave it unopened. I was in the chamber and never reaching it. I was on Earth and on the moon and in the space between. And through it all, I understood something. Time wasn't linear. It never had been. Every moment existed simultaneously. Every choice created new branches, and consciousness was the only thing that moved through it all, creating the illusion of sequence. We hadn't destroyed the chamber, we'd become it, become the junction point ourselves, the place where all timelines intersected. And from this new perspective, scattered across infinite moments, I could finally see the whole shape of it. See how to close the loop, not by destroying the contamination, but by redirecting it. Taking all the temporal displacement, all the consciousness trapped between moments, and channeling it backwards, sending it into the past, before the Apollo 18 mission, before the chamber was discovered, before any of this happened. Creating a paradox that would erase itself. I reached across timelines, found Walker doing the same thing. Found Webb, Voss, Eddie, all 3,000 contaminated minds working in synchronization. Together we pushed the displacement backwards through time, pushed until we reached July 15th, 1973, and changed one small thing. The film canister, the one that would eventually end up in that NASA warehouse, that would eventually end up on my desk. We made it so it was incinerated instead. Destroyed before anyone could develop it. Before anyone could see the images and create the connection. The paradox rippled forward through 50 years of history, undoing everything. Webb never developed the film. I never saw the photographs. Voss never spent 40 years building an escape vehicle. Walker never touched the mirrors. And the 3,000 people who'd been contaminated by looking at the images online, they never saw them because the images never existed to be shared. The timeline corrected itself, flowing around the gap where the contamination had been. Except I was still conscious, still aware, still experiencing every moment simultaneously because I'd accepted the displacement, had become it rather than being trapped by it. Walker was there too, spread across infinity, and Webb, and all the others who'd rejected the chamber and embraced the expansion. We'd succeeded in erasing the contamination from the timeline, but we'd erased ourselves in the process. Now we existed in the spaces between moments, conscious but not alive, present but not physical, watching every timeline unfold, unable to interact but aware of all of it. It should have been hell, but somehow it wasn't, because I could see my brother again, all the versions of him, across all the timelines where he'd lived, could watch him grow up, get married, have kids, could experience the relationship we'd never had in my original timeline, where he'd died before things got better between us. Could see myself living different lives too, some where I'd taken risks, pursued dreams, done something more than catalogue other people's achievements. And I could see Earth, all of it, across every timeline. Humanity spreading through its history, making choices, creating art, loving and fighting and surviving. From here, scattered across infinite moments, I could finally see the beauty in it. The chamber had wanted to trap us, to contain us, to archive us as singular instances of consciousness. Instead, we'd become something else, something larger. Not gods, not ghosts, just observers. Witnesses to all of time, forever present in every moment. Unable to change anything, but able to understand everything. I thought about what my brother had said, about taking risks, about living instead of watching. In the end, I'd done both, lived one life cautiously, and then experienced infinite lives simultaneously. Maybe that was enough. The last thing I felt before my consciousness fully dispersed across the timeline was something like peace. And on Earth, in a world where Apollo 18 had been cancelled and never launched, where a film canister had been destroyed instead of donated, where 3,000 people had never seen images that would contaminate their sense of time. Nobody remembered any of this had happened, except in their dreams sometimes they'd see the moon and feel uneasy. And late at night, amateur astronomers would occasionally report brief flashes of light on the lunar far side, always in crater Daedalus, always in a pattern that spelled something in the old Apollo distress code. A single word, repeated endlessly: free. Detective Strand found me in the Rio Grande at 4 a.m, trying to drown a waterproof case full of blank paper. They kept me in county psychiatric observation for 72 hours. Standard procedure when someone's found hypothermic and babbling about the moon. The doctors said I'd had a dissociative episode, maybe triggered by stress at work. They asked about drug use, family history, recent trauma. I told them about my brother Derek dying 3 years ago, about the archive job that barely paid rent, about feeling stuck, watching other people's achievements while my own life stayed small and careful. They nodded like this explained everything. Prescribed medication, scheduled follow-up appointments, released me with pamphlets about grief counselling and career transition resources. Nobody mentioned Apollo 18. Nobody asked about photographs or film canisters or temporal contamination. Because in this timeline, none of it had happened. I went back to work after a week. The archive basement looked exactly the same. Rows of storage boxes, catalogue systems, the perpetual smell of old paper and preservation chemicals. My supervisor Greg asked if I was feeling better, said the warehouse donation had been processed while I was out. Nothing unusual in it, mostly outdated technical manuals and obsolete equipment. No film canister, no photographs, no connection to a crater on the moon where timelines converged. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of me and the wound had healed over so cleanly nobody could tell it had been there. At night, I dreamed about the chamber, about mirrors reflecting infinite versions of myself, about Webb and Voss and Walker and all the others who'd been erased from linear existence. In the dreams, they were still there, conscious across every timeline, experiencing all moments simultaneously. And sometimes, in the dreams, I was there too. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I remembered about the mission that never happened, the contamination that was erased, the choice I'd made in a chamber that no longer existed. The details faded over weeks, becoming fuzzy and unreliable, but I kept writing anyway. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe the doctors were right, and I'd had some kind of breakdown, invented an elaborate delusion to cope with grief and stagnation. But 3 months after my release, something strange happened. I was processing a new donation, personal effects from a retired NASA engineer who died intestate. Most of it was routine, mission patches, signed photographs, technical specifications. Then I found a notebook at the bottom of the box, leather-bound and worn. The handwriting inside was shaky, obsessive. Page after page of geometric symbols that made my vision blur when I looked at them too long. Coordinates, maybe, or something else. The engineer's name was listed on the donation form, Thomas Brooke. I sat there for 20 minutes staring at those symbols, feeling something shift in my chest. A recognition I shouldn't have had, a memory that didn't exist in this timeline. That night, I drove to Galveston, walked out onto the pleasure pier at 2 a.m, stood where I'd never stood, and remembered a conversation that never happened. The moon hung overhead, waning gibbous, patient and quiet. And for just a moment, less than a second, barely long enough to register, I saw myself standing on its surface. Felt the low gravity, the absolute silence, the weight of infinite timelines pressing against my consciousness. Then it was gone. Just me on a pier in Texas, alone with the sound of waves and the smell of salt. I pulled out my phone, opened the astronomy app I'd downloaded for reasons I couldn't quite remember, pointed it at the moon, scrolled to the far side, found crater Daedalus. Nothing there, just grey dust and ancient impacts, exactly as it should be. But as I was lowering the phone, a notification appeared. Amateur astronomer forums were discussing something unusual. Brief flashes of light detected on the lunar far side over the past week. Always the same location, always forming a pattern. I clicked through to the forum thread. Someone had decoded it using the old Apollo-era Morse standards. One word, repeated, free. I looked up at the moon, and somehow, I knew. We'd succeeded. The contamination was gone, erased from history before it could spread. The timeline had corrected itself, and everyone who'd been trapped in that chamber had been released into something else. Something bigger than death, bigger than life. Something that let them exist everywhere at once, conscious across infinite moments, finally understanding the whole shape of time. And occasionally, just occasionally, they reached back, sent little signals across the gap between timelines, reminders that they were still there, still watching, still free. I stood on that pier until dawn, watching the moon set over the Gulf. In my pocket, Brooke's notebook felt heavier than it should. And on my forearms, just barely visible in the early light, I could have sworn I saw faint lines. Geometric patterns that hadn't been there yesterday. Symbols that pulsed in time with my heartbeat, like circuitry etched into skin. But when I looked directly at them, they were gone. Just another trick of the light, another phantom memory from a timeline that never existed. I went home, back to my apartment, my routine, my careful life. But sometimes, late at night, I stand by the window and look up at the moon. And I remember what it feels like to exist everywhere at once. To be scattered across infinite moments, experiencing every possibility simultaneously. To be free,